Right, so here I am, and I'm on Whitechapel. Now 1888, this street, this whole area looked totally different. It was pitch black, only lit by a couple of street lamps, which were really dim. Now, where I am today, just behind me, where them bin bags are actually, that is where the body of Polly Nichols was discovered by Charles Lechmere. Now, Jack the Ripper came down this street back in 1888 at the night time, and he brutally murdered Polly Nichols. He cut her, he attacked her abdominal regions and basically mutilated Polly. So what I'm going to do now is going to spin the camera around and I'm going to show you the actual spot where Polly Nichols' body was discovered back in 1888. Polly was cut from across her throat, two massive deep wounds across her throat that went right back to the vertebra, and it was only a few mil off actually severing her head. He also attacked the abdominal and around the sort of uterus area, typical Jack the Ripper style. But if you just come with me, Dad. Sorry for the background noise, but I'll just take you to the actual location. So right here where I'm stood is where Polly's body was discovered. And if our man, who we think is Jack the Ripper, Lechmere, he was the first guy. He was the first person out of any of the possible suspects that we had, Kosminski, Maybrick, everything like that. He was the only person that you can connect to one of the actual victims. So this place is Lechmere, right at the scene of the crime. And he found Polly Nichols at night. She'd been totally mutilated. So we're now at the scene of the crime of Annie Chapman. Her body was found mutilated through these doors here. Sort of just past them doors through that glass window. Now, this is the first time that we sort of get a bit of an insight into the mind of Jack the Ripper, because this block in 1888 was full of residents and there were 17 people living on the block. And for him to take that risk, knowing that he could be caught, it sort of gives us an insight that he's a chancer, he's a bit of a gambler. And throughout his killing spree, as each one goes on, you'll find that he's more and more willing to take these risks. But obviously it's still got the same name as Hanbury Street, but it's totally been transformed. And I think the brewery might have pulled it down because they own the actual block. But just through here, out the back door, is where her body was found, severely mutilated. And there was a couple of residents at the time that actually heard the noise and the commotion going on, which just makes me sort of think he just thrived. I think he thrived off the fact that he could be caught. But I'm going to try and be cheeky and I'm going to go in if I can. And I'm just going to try and get a shot of the, the approximate location of where her body would have been found. Right, so roughly where Annie Chapman would have been found that day, it's roughly around this area here, roughly, give or take. But this is as close as we can get to the actual location. And it's quite chilling to know that people are in here now and they're actually eating food, not knowing that there was a horrific crime just behind them. Really strange. Right, so we're now at the scene of the crime of Elizabeth Stride, who at 1 o'clock in the morning was found murdered just through where these gates are here on my right hand side. Now, she was the only one of the victims where she wasn't mutilated. She had a throat slit, but she wasn't mutilated in the abdominal regions or nothing like that, and there was a reason to that. The reason being is that Jack the Ripper was disturbed that night. He got disturbed by a passerby, and later on at 1 in the morning, a cartman with his horse and cart came over here, and the horse sort of shied away. And don't forget, this was pitch black, absolutely pitch black. He struck a match on the wall, and he looked down at the body, and what he thought was some sort of like tarpaulin on the floor was actually Elizabeth Stride. Now, this also adds more credibility to the fact that we think the Ripper was more of a, he was a gambler with what he had to do. Unfulfilled by his killing, he then went on to murder again the same night, and it all happened on this street here. Now, our man Lechmere, we can pin into this location too, because just a few hundred yards that way was his mother's house, his bigamous mum, and also Lechmere's daughter lived there too. So he had good reason to be around here. Plus, before he moved to Doveton Street, he actually lived, I think it was James Street, on the other side. Now, just come this way, Dad. Now, the Ripper, going off the location here, knowing that he knew this area well, and he knew James Street really well, he knew that this location was sort of ingrained in his mind. So he knew this place like the back of his hand. He knew exactly where he was going. But in 1888, at 1 o'clock, the poor body of Elizabeth Stride was found there at the hands of Jack the Ripper. So here we are on Mitre Square. Now this is the second part of the double event, the infamous double event, where Catherine Edds was brutally mutilated just where them railings are on the right hand side, just through there. Now Mitre Square has changed totally. Once a real bad rundown place, and this part of London has had a massive revamp. But this was a real savage and brutal job that he did on Catherine. Now he disemboweled her basically and threw her intestines over her right shoulder. He cut her eyelids, took parts of her uterus, and infamously he took her kidney. Now this was all done in the pitch black, poorly lit streets, and there were police patrolling every 15 minutes. And a surgeon actually said it would have took like a skilled surgeon to have done something like that, around 12 to 15 minutes, but he was operating in pitch dark. And this is why I keep saying to you, he was a chancer and a risker and a gambler, because he thrived off the fact that it possibly could be caught. But this was one, it sounds like it is the most horrific murder you could possibly think of, but the next victim really did suffer at the hands of the Ripper, more so than poor Catherine. Now, like I say, it was just through here, just through them railings here of Mitre Square, and she's the only one. If you follow me, Dad, just come this way. Catherine's the only one of the victims that's actually got a plaque in memory of her. So it's a really nice touch, but she's the only victim to have an actual plaque. Right, this is the fifth and final murder of Jack the Ripper. Now, he brutally butchered Mary Jane Kelly. Now, where we are today this is Christ Church. Now, all of the prostitutes used to hang about round here. There was always moved on by the police, and they'd sort of loop the area and come back round looking for work. Now, on the night of the murder, if I just pan you over here, Dad, this is the infamous 10 Bells pub. Now, the 10 Bells pub, right here, this is where she was drinking heavily that night, and at some point throughout the night she met her fate. She met Jack the Ripper. Now, Jack the Ripper and Mary went back to her house, which was located through this building here on the side. There's a building here now. It was sort of where Miller's Court and Dorset Street met, and she had a little house there. And I won't go into too much detail, but basically she met a very, very brutal ending to the hands of Jack the Ripper. Now, you've got to pardon me phrasing, because in sort of Ripperology terms, this was his signature move. This was his sort of masterpiece. He brutally butchered her, and it's gone down in the history books as like the worst murder to have ever happened, you know, especially in England, if not parts of the world. But this is where it all happened, and poor Mary Jane Kelly met her death just through them doors. Now, we can't actually go in and film because the shop's now, but this is basically the whole area. Now, it is mad to see, because even though it's all done up, this area, and there's new buildings, there is nods to the past. The old buildings like the Ten Bells pub and all around here, there are new old buildings, and they would have been up when all this took place. Now, it's always that like famous saying, isn't it? You know, if walls could talk, and if walls could talk, they'd reveal the identity of Jack the Ripper. But it all happened here, and even 130 years later, it's still one of the most talked about murders in the world. And it all took place around here, and it still puts a chill down your spine just being in areas like this. But through them doors there is where Jack the Ripper murdered Mary Jane Kelly.